All right, before we proceed any further, I want to talk about how we're going to treat these panels to get them into the final condition that we need them to be in. At this point, I've got the one panel that I'm going to be using already glued up, and it would be as if we left off from the previous video. And as you can see behind me, I've got another panel that's already been cleaned up, and we've routed some V-grooves in the front between the boards to make it look a little bit, give it a little bit more depth and a little bit more class to it. But before we go ahead and do those things, we've got to go ahead and clean up the glued up panels. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and take these clamps off. This one has totally been dried. It's cured actually for a couple of days over the weekend. So I'm going to go ahead and take these off. I crank them on pretty good to get all the joints together. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to finish the surface. So let me get these off and put away, and then we'll get right to work. Okay, so now that we've got these glued up panels done, I want to talk a minute about cleaning up the surface, because there's a lot of different ways of doing this, and people get comfortable. What I've noticed over the years of kind of teaching people is that they get comfortable, different people get comfortable with different methods very quickly, and some adapt to one method more quickly than others, and others adapt to a different method more quickly. So I'm going to show you a few things that I think you need to do, and then I'll talk about some alternatives. So as you can see, the glue here, these panels are very heavy actually, but the glue here is obviously has seeped out. I was able to wipe some of it up, which I try to do because I think it's easier to get it then than to subject the tools that you're going to be used to sanding and everything else like that. You can very quickly gum up sandpaper with a lot of hard dried glue. But as you can see, these panels are have some glue seepage that came out, particularly in this last round where I glued these up. And so one of the things that I think is kind of essential to have is these dried glue scrapers. You can get them anywhere, Home Depot, Menards, Lowe's, wherever your hardware center is, they're going to have these things. And all you're going to do with this is basically, if you have any of these dried, crumbly glue lines sticking out, is you're just going to want to press down with it and pull it back, and it's going to help you get as much of the glue off as you can. Now, not all of these boards are perfectly aligned. We use the cauls, and we used in the other video, we use the cauls and the clamps to get everything pushed together and down. But obviously, you're going to have some discrepancy or unevenness between some of the boards, and that's okay. All you want to do with this tool is basically get as much of the glue off as you can. And to some of you, this is probably like nails on a chalkboard. You might even be asking, oh my God, the wood is so nicely put together, why are you scratching it? And the reason is because we are not even close to being done with these panels in terms of prepping them for the finished product. So anyway, all you're going to do is when you use this scraper, as you push it down, you apply moderate pressure. You don't have to be grinding it, because then you will gouge out some serious wood fibers here. But you just want to put a modicum amount of pressure on it, moderate amount of pressure, and just drag along. And yes, you will scratch and you will tear a little bit. You can see that. That's totally okay. It's totally normal. You try not to, get it real deep. You just really want to get as much of the surface. But you can see even these little bits of sawdust are falling off. I am scraping the wood. So I'm going to go ahead and get these cleaned up. You'll just go down each row and get as much off as you can. You won't get absolutely all of it off, I can tell you that. Especially if the boards are uneven a little bit, it creates like a little well of glue, and so you'll get it flat, but it'll still kind of be in the little crevice between the two pieces. So we're not worried about that just yet, but you want to get as much of the glue off as you can so you can save your sandpaper. So again, a lot of this woodworking and painting and construction comes down to the prep work. The more prep work you do, the less difficult your finishing stages are, and the better the product ends up turning out. And if you can take painting for an example, You know, if you don't go through and sand everything down and fill all your holes with spackle or drywall mud or something, and then clean those up and get all the walls as pristine as possible before you put on the paint, then the paint doesn't look as good. The final coat of paint should go on like, you know, very easy and take the least amount of time. So if you're going to spend time anywhere, spend it up front in the prep work to make the product as good as possible, so that the stages that are down the line waiting for you to do are easier and turn out much better looking. So let me talk about a couple of ways that you can get the wood to be a little bit more flatter. The obvious is sanding, but sanding takes a long time, even with a rough grit sandpaper. If you've got a lot of unevenness in your boards, which we don't really, but there are some places here, for example, like it's not all the way down, but you can see, like, just if you can see, like right here, you know, you can see that one of these boards settled a little bit lower than the other. So we're going to have to treat that, because the boards are largely the same thickness. We're going to have to treat that on the front and the back. But the front is more important. These are not going to be barn doors that are really visible on both sides when they're closed, although they will be. We're closing off a room that is like a craft room. The client is going to be doing some crafting in this room. It's a very small room, but they just want a nice set of doors to go over it. So I'm much more concerned about the front, although we will flatten up the back as well. If your door is a through door to a major room and you need it to look good on both sides, then you'll have to repeat this exact same process on the back side. And we'll do most of it, but not all of the work, and you'll see that coming up. The reason you want as much glue off as possible and you're going to sand this thing is because we're going to stain it. And if you've ever stained something that you didn't get all the glue off of, and I've been there many times, what ends up happening is you're going to get a white patch in the middle of your staining field, in the middle of the field of the panel, wherever that glue is dried. Typically, the glue that I use, at least, does not absorb stain. It's not a stainable wood glue. There are some stainable wood glues. Not a huge fan. I still think I see a difference most of the time, but you know, I don't usually use that kind of a product a lot, so I don't have a lot of experience with it. It's just the times that I have, I've noticed you know, that it still kind of shows through a little bit. So your best bet is to get all the glue off. Now, if there's serious unevenness between these boards, you can always use a plane. And I used a plane on this door just in a few spots, you know, to get the height down on the one side, just a little bit. So you're going to rub the plane over, you know, and in this case, I'm not looking to take a massive amount of wood shavings. I know everybody's probably seen those Craftsman commercials where they've got the real, I think some on the camera fell, where they've got these real long smoothing planes and they're just kind of going along and the big wood shaving is coming up. That's not what I'm aiming for, because I'm not really flattening the boards that much, and I don't want to take off a lot. You can use these very simple 6.5 or 7-inch block planes if you want, and again, you're just going to hold it and drag it along, and if you get some dust out, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. What that means is that it's not enough to make a difference to the block plane. Obviously, with a block plane, if you're not familiar with it, you can adjust the blade to take off as much or as little. You don't want to really take off a lot, so you want it to just be shy of the protruding surface, or just protruding just a little bit beyond the surface of the plane, so that you get a little bit of scraping and everything. So then what you want to do is you just kind of drag it along, and you can see I get a little bit of wood shavings and everything, and that's perfectly fine with me for these high spots. Again, I don't want to carve into the wood. I just want to make sure some of these high spots are taken care of with this plane. And you definitely, you know, want to see some small amount of wood shavings, but you're not going to see the ones where, you know, you're getting a big old nice curl of wood shaving throughout. That's just not what we're really going for. So then, once you're done, if you're block planing anything, then we'll start sanding. All right, I've done about all I can do with the block plane. It's generally, pretty smooth. There are obviously still some spots that need to be sanded down. There's still some glue stains here that need to be removed. But with this, I don't want to do really much more. When you start taking whole shavings out, then you know you're kind of done. So let me set that aside and let me talk about sanding really quickly. This is a belt sander, and it takes, this one is a Makita. It's very nice. I've had it for many years. I was using it on some project, like a 50 grit. Yeah, this is like a 50 grit. That's like really rough. That's like chunks of rock practically embedded on these things. So I'm going to switch it out to an 80 grit. It's real easy to change. You just kind of, there's a little lever here that you loosen the I don't know, it's like a tank wheel, kind of a tank tread here, and then you just kind of slide it down and tighten it up, and then you run it for a little bit, which I got to plug it in. You got to run it for a little bit, and then it's kind of centers itself on the tread. All right, so when you're using a belt sander like this, it's very easy to gouge the wood. So I never use this thing ever on like a final finish. This is for really, stock removal, or grinding something down that really, needs to take a beating to get it down. So that's fine. I will use this, this belt sander on this guy. The thing I will tell you with the belt sander is you really want to, there are two things that are important with the belt sander. One is you want to make sure you use the right grit sandpaper. This is an 80 grit sandpaper that I've got on there now. I could probably do a 120 and get away with it. You want to use the highest grit you can get away with using. From experience, I just know when I need an 80 and a 120 because I've been doing sanding. I mean, it's a part of every project I do, so you get the feel for these things. But on something like this, where there's still a lot of like little dry glue lines, I still have some unevenness, I'm just going to go ahead with the 80. If you do not have a belt sander, that's totally fine. You can use an orbital sander or a random orbit sander in this case. I work in a shop, but I'm also out on the job site, which is very different. So you'll see some people who work only in their shops and they do all their creation in the shops, and then maybe they go sell something, I don't know, but they can have a certain type or amount of tools, and that's fine. I have to have, like, I don't know, different kinds of tools because I'll be out on the job site and I'll never know exactly what tools I might need for a given installation. So I went ahead and purchased this one. It's a Bosch. The difference between this one and a standard sander, not the dust, but is that this one's a 6-inch, where most standard ones that you get at the store are 5-inch. This is a standard hook and loop 6-hole base. So all I have to do is stick the sandpaper on and I'm ready to go. This has two different modes on it. One is very aggressive and one is very fine. And this is what I'll use usually after this. I'll use it on kind of an aggressive mode. Again, 100 or 80 grit, just to try to get everything kind of uniformly smooth, because you have to watch out with the belt sander. If you leave it in place too long at any one given point, it will carve out a divot. It's a very strong sander. I mean, it's what it does. It's what it's meant to do. So then I'll follow up with a random orbit sander, and then I'll just change the grit. So on something like this project, because it's a soft wood, I will go to about 150. You can do a 220, it's fine, but I think because it's being stained and then I'm going to seal it with polyurethane, a 150 is fine. Never had any real problems with it. But then the other thing that a lot of people have mentioned on the pages that I have is you want to make sure you have adequate dust protection or dust collection. So either wear a mask or get something hooked up to it that's going to help you extract the dust. In this case, I have a portable vacuum. As I said, I go on site. I need to bring these stuff on site. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to sand everything flat. We're going to probably do 3 sandings. We're probably going to do one with the 80 on the belt sander, and then an 80 on the random orbit sander, and then another 150 on the random orbit sander so that everything is smooth and uniform. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Remember, we're not in this for perfection, we're in this for quality, and there's a difference between perfection and quality in my mind. Always has been. So anyway, let me get started with this. We'll get the back set up here, and then we'll get this thing sanded down, and then we'll come back and talk about routing the V grooves between the boards. All right, I'm just about at the point where I just wanted to kind of show you this very quickly. I'm about 2/3 of the way sanding this down, and I'm basically done at this end. So these things are very heavy, and I want to make sure that I, am flipping them around as few times as possible. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to very quickly cut this end off here. I know what my final dimension needs to be for the height of the door, and that's 78.5 inches. And so what I'm going to do is just use, you guys have seen me use this thing before. It's just a homemade kind of template here that the saw rides on. The saw sled rides on so that I get a nice crisp cut at the end with no tear out on the good side. So I'm just going to use that, and all I'm going to do is I align these boards as best I could, taking into account what looks best and then the lengths of the board. And what I'm going to do is just kind of set it about 1/4 inch from the end. And then what I want to do is to square it up, and that's so that I don't cut the end on an angle. I can't really measure from either end because neither end is square. So I've got to make sure that the jig is square here, and all I need to do with that is just kind of snug it up here and just make sure that it is square. Yeah, you can see it's a little bit out of square here. So we'll kind of bring that into square. And that's good. You guys, if you don't have one of these squares, these 2-foot squares in, you got to have one. I mean, they come in just all the time. I feel like I'm using a square of some sort. And this one is especially good for panels and longer, wider items. But in any case, all right, that's squared up. So what I'm going to do basically is put a clamp on it. 2 clamps actually, because 1 clamp is good, but the other 2 clamps are better. All right, and now that it's squared, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the power saw and go ahead and cut that to length. And the way this works is the power saw sled I have an augmented sled on here for some other reasons, but then I'm just going to let this sucker ride along this edge here, and it's going to produce a perfectly square cut, down at the bottom. So I'll do that, get that plugged in, and then we'll come back after all the rest of the sanding is done, and we'll cut it to size again, and then see where we're at from there.